Hey there. So this is the beginning of our demo from Rocket City HEMA for the summer reading program, where we're going to be going over a bunch of different weapons. We don't actually have time to go over all the weapons we study, unfortunately, but that's okay. We're going to cover the majority of our three main systems that we study, and I really hope that you guys enjoy it and that this kindles some interest into reading about the period, reading about sword fighting, reading about history in general. Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoy. So what is a longsword? A longsword is one of these. Now I have two different kinds of longsword here. I have a blunted longsword that is designed to be just like the sharp version, and I have what is called a fetter. So a fetter is what you would practice with, both historically and mostly these days. It's designed to be a little bit lighter, it's designed to flex some more, and just generally be safer. Versus this guy is designed to more closely mimic what a real sharp sword would have been like for when we're doing drills or things like that. But when it comes to the longsword, it is a two-handed weapon with two edges, and some of our techniques will use one edge versus the other, which we'll be going over. And it can be used in a rather wide variety of ways. It's a very diverse weapon. And it also was used throughout a wide variety of time, as I'll introduce in just a moment here when we go over our equipment. So, I am wearing an approximation of what you would wear in the 1400s. So I am wearing an arming jacket, which I will later wear when I'm doing messer, or when I'm wearing my armor, this will be underneath. It's got points that attach to it, as that would be what my armor hooks to. It was also the fashion at the time to wear something that looked like an arming jacket, even if it wasn't necessarily, because everyone wants to look militaristic. I'm wearing my hosen, and then my normal flat shoes with a linen shirt underneath. So cool, comfortable, and basically purpose-built. Cam here is wearing a little bit later period. So now we move on into the 1500s, the 16th century. So he is wearing general sort of popular look of the Landsknecht, the mercenaries that fought all throughout Germany and the rest of Europe. He's got these slashed, multicolored, poofy trousers that partially make him look like a clown to our eyes, but in the day, this was to show that he has been he's been gallivanting about the countryside. He's been taking nice clothing that normally someone of his rank would not be able to have and attaching it to make himself look more grandiose. Now, we would see fencers using their techniques on the battlefield, absolutely, but also he more accurately represents what people of the middle class, the burghers, would be wearing when they are going to fechtschools, fencing in classes, much like we do today, but a more historical version. So thank you, Cam. Now we come to Jake, who is wearing what we wear these days. So obviously we got to be a little bit safer these days. So Jake here is wearing much more heavy protection. He's got heavies on his hand, on his elbows. He's got padding underneath this jacket. We even have padding on the trousers and shin guards. He's got a nice gorget to keep himself safe and a scrum cap for underneath his mask. Jake is a good example of what we wear these days. So we've gone over our wardrobe. Let's start looking at techniques. Okay, so our first technique. The first thing that's going to happen is that Cam is going to demonstrate a basic Oberhau, just a standard stepping in attack. Good. He struck Jake in the head to the opening that Jake gave. So now Jake is going to counter the Oberhau with what is called the Zornhau. So what's happening as they do it again is that when Cam comes forward, Jake is pushing forward and striking into the strike to both hit Cam and defend himself at the same time. Now Cam is going to counter by doing a Zornhau of his own, and they'll end up in a bind. From here, to gain a mechanical advantage, Jake is going to raise his arms and thrust at Cam. What this does is it moves the strong of his weapon, which is closer to his hand, up closer to the weak of Cam's weapon, where he doesn't have leverage. Let's see that again at more regular speed. Yes, that was good. Okay. Now what's going to happen is Cam doesn't want to play that game. So when Jake comes in with his Zornhau, Cam is going to push his tip way to the side from the bind, which will lead to Jake needing to go to the other side in what's called an Abnehmen, or takeoff. Okay, so now we're going to see a slightly different technique. Cam is going to use the thumb grip, which is where he's going to push his thumb up onto the blade, so that way he turns it sideways in his hands. This allows him to do some nifty things. He's going to use a strike called the Zwerchau to counter against Jake's Oberhau. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. So as he comes down, Cam pushes his arms up and out to the side, putting the strong of his weapon against Jake's weak, catching it and hitting him in the face. Let's see it again. Oh yeah. What'll happen for the next technique is that Cam is going to once again do his Zwerkow, but Jake does not want that Zwerkow in his face, so he's going to push against it, which will cause Cam to lead up with another Zwerkow. That's the great thing about the Zwerkow, is you can pretty much just keep attacking, because it ends up almost like a helicopter's rotor blades. It can go back and forth and back and forth. So, now what's going to happen is we're going to avoid the bind entirely. So Jake has dropped down into a position called Schrankfoot. It means barrier. The idea being that he's opened up his head and is daring Cam to come in and try and hit him. Now what's going to happen is that as Cam comes forward and the strike comes in, Jake is going to dive wide to the side and execute what is called the Krumpfau. You'll notice that he also has his thumb on the blade once again, which allows him to strike sideways. Let's see it a couple times. Fantastic. All right, switch perspectives. So now we're going to see some disarms and takeaways. So what's going to happen is these guys are going to come to a bind, and then Jake is going to reach out with an inverted hand, grasp both swords on the flat. He won't cut himself doing this. He's then going to push his other arm forward underneath Cam's arms, and then rip it away. Now note that he steps back with both points presented, so that if Cam gets any cheeky ideas, he's got something else to think about. Let's see it again. Not to be outdone, Cam is now going to take away Jake's sword. What's happened is he's approached in distance low, so Jake has no choice but to attack him in the head. He's going to bogan as Jake comes down, guarding himself, reach underneath, grab hold of the sword, and try to stab Jake. But Jake, this isn't his first time around the block, he's going to defend himself and catch Cam's tip. Now they're in sort of an even fight. So what Cam's going to do is he's going to spin hard to his side, putting both swords onto his back and using the leverage of leaning forward to pop it out of Jake's hand. Let's see it again. So first off, what is a messer? So a messer literally translates to a knife. And you may, of course, make the joke, well, that's not a knife, but it is. Now, you will hear sometimes other terms refer to it, Grossmesser, Langes Messer, Kriegsmesser. What these really all mean is a messer like this. Now, sometimes you'll see one shorter, sometimes you'll see some with thinner blades, wider blades, etc. But let's go over the key pieces of it. So the most important ones are going to be, of course, the blade, which only has one main edge. And this is where we get the long edge and the short edge. So this right here to about here is all going to be a fixed spine. Now, the spine will actually be used occasionally offensively, as these were carried in civilian daily use, which often means that street brawls would break out, and due to legal reasons, even though they're fighting with weapons, they don't necessarily want to kill each other. It's all just posturing. So sometimes you would have techniques that specifically strike with the spine, or even hit with the flat, to show that you could have hit someone, but we're not going to get sued today. Now the other key part that you'll see in a messer is going to be the noggle. The noggle, or nail, is this little outcropping right here. Most other swords of the period do not have this. It's not necessarily a unique messer thing, but it is a big part of the messer techniques that we will be going over, because what that allows you to do is now you can catch things where ordinarily you'd be losing your knuckles. So, enough gabbing, let's go ahead and show some of the techniques. So I have two of my students here. I have John and I have Jason. And obviously they're both wearing some nice historical clothing because we like to dress up here at RCH. But we're going to be wearing masks for protection because we'd like to keep our eyes. So, masked up, gentlemen. So our first showcase is going to be from the master Paulus Call. So Paulus Call was a 15th century master, and his messer system is relatively simple, but we're going to go over it. So, the very first play is going to be a slice of the hand from below. John is stepping out to the side as the cut is coming down and delivering a slice into the underside of Jason's arm. Why this is particularly good is that as the cut comes down, he's dodging, he's cutting, life is great and grand and wonderful. Our next technique is going to be now moving into an arm wrap and a takeaway. So as you see, he comes up and through and then uses his step back with his body and his core turn to pop it out of his hands. One more time. Next, we'll be showing what happens if you can't wrap the sword. Either you're not particularly good at disarms, you end up too close and you wrap the arm itself. Then you've got that person locked up, you've got their weapon hand controlled. So Jason will now show that. Go ahead. Good. Okay, let's go ahead and do another take of that. And as you can see, he has him locked up. John's not going anywhere. Depending upon where he locked him, he might have just his wrist, he might have his elbow, and he can start putting pressure onto his elbow like an arm bar. He may have it close to the shoulder, in which case you could throw him. There's a lot of different stuff you can do from this. It's a good entry into a grapple. Next, we'll be moving away from these fantastical arm wraps, and instead we'll be going into a different kind of takeaway. So this time, Jason and John are both going to cut somewhat on the same line, and they'll meet in what is called a bind, and then Jason is going to use his offhand to lever John's sword against him. Go ahead. There we go. As you can see, by gripping the sword on the pommel, he has a lot more leverage than John does just based on the one hand. And he's also using his blade to push down at the same time. Now, he could take the sword fully out of John's hand. However, by locking John up like this, John has the tendency to go, oh, that's my sword, I want to hold on to that. And it ends up actually working against him. So, very good. Let's do that one more time. Fantastic. That was the majority of Paulus' call. So now we're going to move on to a different master. Next we'll be moving on to Master Lekukner. Now Lekukner was actually a priest who loved to fence with the Messer so much that he wrote a gigantic book on it. And Lekukner's techniques, Lekukner is kind of the main man for Messer, so you'll probably hear his name quite a bit if you end up looking things up later. So, the first technique we're going to see is what's referred to as the Zorn Ort. This is going to be a way for John to counter against Jason's incoming cut. So, go ahead. So John turns his Messer over and continues seeking the next opening as he harries against Jason's attempt to defend himself. So let's break that action down, shall we? So first, the cut comes in. John has turned his Messer over, so that way the blade is catching on his noggin at the very least. Now, at this point, Jason goes, hey, I don't like that pointy thing in my face, and John is going to step up as he turns his Messer over to thrust to a new opening. Jason still doesn't like that, so he's going to push some more, and John is going to slip through and use the short edge of his Messer to crack Jason on the back of the head. Now, if John wanted to, he could also use this technique to smack him with the spine, which is a significantly less fatal option. Let's go ahead and show that one more time at fluid speed. So, we've seen the Zornorden work. Now let's go ahead and see the Intrustau. Now, what is the Intrustau? The Intrustau is a specific strike that uses the sword in a slightly different way. So what's going to happen is, Jason is going to come up from below, and he's going to use his guard being high to protect himself as he strikes with the short edge. This will give him an advantage in the bind, and allow him to use the sword in some unique ways, as you'll see. Let's see what it looks like. So as you can see what's happened as they repeat the action. Jason has come up from below, and as they make contact, he's using the pommel of his weapon to hook behind John's sword and then thrust him in the face. Now, John, of course, isn't going to take that lying down. So, now John will use a counter against it. So as we can see, John has stepped out to the side, matching the momentum of Jason's step forward to take a low opening. Not much Jason can do against that. Now let's see Jason use his follow-up in a slightly different way. A little more funny of a way. Now you might ask yourself, why would anyone do this? Well, if they're looking to not necessarily kill their opponent, or perhaps even shame him, go ahead again, this would be an excellent way to show off to your friends. Now, let's say that John is a little bit faster on his counter. Then he can actually go ahead and take Jason's sword away from him using this. Let's break that action down, shall we? So what's happening here is as Jason comes in to hook the back of John's sword, John's letting go and then blocking the incoming thrust with his left hand. He then reaches up and grabs onto the flat of Jason's sword and uses his momentum with a hip turn to pluck it right out of Jason's hands.
and then hands it back to him, because we're all nice here.
So those are just a few of the many, many techniques that you will see with Messer. However, hopefully you've enjoyed this showcase.
Thank you very much, and thank you, gentlemen.
Hello. Now comes to our dagger portion. So we've seen the sword, we've seen armor, we've seen a lot of different stuff. But what about just the dagger by itself, and specifically the dagger out of armor? Now, when it comes to the techniques from the German tradition, the Kunst des Fechtens, the art of fighting, we will often see that the armored and non-armored use of the dagger is very, very similar. Now, what kind of daggers are they using? A wide variety, really. I have a couple with me here. So the one that you're going to see the most is going to be this. This is called a rondel. Rondel literally means rounded. So for example, little guys right here that you'll see on some armor is also called a rondel. But really it means it's got the round hilt. Now, my rondel is rather unique in that it does not have an edge. That's not uncommon. A rondel dagger is really meant to be a spike. It's going to go through thick layers of cloth. It's going to go through mail if you can break a rink and drive in with it. And it's meant to just lock into your gauntlet and be ready to use. That's not to say that some of them didn't have very sharp edges, but their main purpose was to stab, and stab hard. Now, like I said, sometimes you'll see them where they're just spikes. Mine has a little bit of specific smithing to it to make it look rather nice. Not necessarily that uncommon. You want to decorate your dagger because it's going to be your status symbol. Now, another kind of dagger you will see is the Bollock dagger. Now, the Bollock dagger is meant to be a status symbol. It's meant to signify your station, your prowess. It's all that nice stuff that you want to, at a glance, everyone's going to look at and go, wow, that guy has a really nice dagger. He must be important. They can spend that sort of money. But overall, the design is not going to change all that much. You'll see rich ornamentation on the sheath. You know, we've got brass on the bottom here in this case. We've also got a little bit of decoration on the hilt, nice brass up here. But in general, the design is going to be pretty much the same as the rondel. Mine has two edges, though you will often sometimes see one edge. Sometimes you'll see a reinforcement made in, but it's going to be your simple dagger. In general, it's going to be used in an ice pick grip to attack from above. Now, that's not to say that you won't see attacks from below, as we'll see in a moment, but in general, everyone's attack is going to be here. Now, you might be wondering, well, where do you wear the dagger? In general, the dagger is going to be worn on your right side, if you are right-handed. So, on my hip, or most often here at the small of the back. The reasoning for this is there's a couple different reasons, really. Most of it is convenience. If it's over here on my left, I have to reach across my body to draw it, which someone can suppress my arm, and now I'm not getting my dagger clear. As to why you might wear it further in the back, this is pure speculation, but from having fought in armor quite a lot, I often find that if your dagger is more forward, oftentimes the person grappling with you will pull your own dagger on you, versus if you've got it more to the back, they have to reach a lot further to get it. I want this to be easy for me to grab, harder for him to grab. And if you look at it, if I've got it here on the small of my back, I can create distance, reach back, pull my dagger, and he cannot stop my arm from getting it clear. So, but you will see daggers worn in other ways. In general, though, small of the back, drawing into an ice pick. So, with that in mind, let's look at some techniques, shall we? So let's go ahead and see our first attack. So the most likely thing that he's going to come out at me with is going to be a downward stab in his dominant side. He's putting his weight into it. He's really putting everything in here, and he's usually going to be targeting right about here in the nape of my neck to get down into my organs, all that fun stuff. You know, wonderful stuff. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that I block it. Now, I don't want to do a weak block. So if he strikes down at me, sure, in theory, I've gotten between us, but there's some problems. It's just the force of my elbow against his entire body. I am not going to win that fight. And furthermore, even though he hasn't stabbed me, that dagger is quite long. I need to create as much distance as I possibly can, and I also need to make sure that I can use my hand. So, the next thing you might think about doing is as he comes down, right, catching it this way. The problem with this is that if he puts his full body weight into this, that's going to put a lot of pressure onto my thumb, and my thumb is going to end up going that way. And that's not particularly good. So, what's better instead is for me to use the back of my hand and chop into his incoming strike. At the same time, I also move forward. So that way I'm jamming his motion. That didn't even get a ton of momentum. Didn't feel like anything on my hand. Now, once I'm here, I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to grasp hard onto his arm, and I'm going to roll it as I twist. Sometimes I'll even use the outside of my arm here
to move his dagger out of presence. I'm not worried about that cutting me. I have other things that are more important. You're more important, David. But I'm going to roll that, and from here I'm going to step up with my back foot and fill this gap here while bringing my arm and body across. What this is going to do is it's going to off-balance him. So that way when I bring my leg through, he will go onto the ground. Ready? Technique 2. Another thing that might happen is that as he comes down with the strike, he doesn't want me to be able to grab this. So he's going to start to try and pull his arm back to start doing his best psycho impression. This gives me a new opening that I can fill. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step through the same way I did before. I'm going to take my right arm, and I'm going to go underneath his arm. We're currently standing back to back, which allows me to plant my shoulder into his shoulder and exert pressure. So we'll trade places and show that again. His strike comes down, he starts to pull away. I see that bend, I step through, put it onto my back. Bad times. Obviously we won't show that one full speed because I gotta use David some more. Okay. Technique 3. Now I have a dagger in my hand. So, things change a little bit. Obviously, the quickest solution would be he strikes at me. Game over. That's pretty easy. However, there might be social context that it's not a very good thing for me to kill David right now, as we talked about in the intro. So, what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to make sure that I can disable him without necessarily hurting him too badly. So I have some options. Obviously, I could take my dagger and I could deliver a cut or something along those lines, but that still could be seen as harming him too badly. If his elbow has this slight bend like it does now, I can feed this through and exert that same sort of pressure I did with my body, which is great. Or maybe I want to do that throw that I did before. I'm going to take the pommel of my dagger, strike into the cheek, or maybe even onto the chest to sort of disrupt him, bring it around and hook, and now this becomes my hand, bring through for the throw. So, while it may be the non-lethal version, it's not necessarily always the nicest version, which is a common theme with most of this stuff. But let's see what happens when an attack comes in from another side. So now the attack is going to come in from his left side. Now, what's going to change here is that as he's coming down, I can't really block with my left hand anymore. I could, but the problem is, that's, again, very weak muscles against his whole body. It's better for me to instead use my right arm. Okay? I may even step into it if need be. But this changes things in that now I can't throw him backward anymore. I'm going to need to throw him forward. So I'm going to grab it. I'm going to twist once again, which will usually present his elbow. I'm going to take my left hand and I'm going to put it here underneath the elbow. I'm going to roll it over, which exerts pressure down here onto his shoulder and pushes him to the ground. I lock this into my hip, so that way it can't go anywhere. And at this point, I could kick out his legs. I could slap him in the back of the head. I could just call him names. All sorts of things I want to do. So let's show that again. Now, if, for example, his arm is a little more straight and I don't have that immediate target presented to me, what I can do instead is I'll straighten it out and I'll step back away from him and suck him closer to my body. So his arm's a lot straighter here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swim over, wrapping my arm, and I'm going to tug this close to me, which as you can see drags him down to the ground. This is good for me. I can do mean things from here. I can take his dagger away and run away. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to swim it closer to my body, and he's not going anywhere. So let's show that one more time. Boom. That arm's nice and straight. We're going to swim over, lock that down close to me. He has no choice but to go to the ground. Now let's talk about what happens if I have a dagger in my hand, because things change. As a right-handed person, my dagger would be worn here like we talked about, which means that if I pull it, I have a bit of a problem if this attack comes in from this side. I don't care how fast you think you are, you're not going to be able to go, ha! It's just not going to happen, okay? I have to use this arm to defend myself. One cheeky trick is just to fold it against your arm, so if he swings nice and hard, that's going to hurt a lot, but it doesn't really end the fight. So, instead what I can do is I'm going to block with my forearm. I'm going to use this a bit like a mantis, and I'm going to hook him to me. So in comes this strike, block, hook, and now it works exactly the same as my hand did. However, it also gives me other fun options. For example, he comes down, I block, I'm going to hook, and I'm going to hook very close to his hand. I'm then going to reach underneath and between us and grasp my own dagger, and I am going to roll my hands forward, exerting pressure down onto his hand. What this does is that there's a very small nerve that runs right here. When you get pressure exerted onto it, you would attest to this. It's not a very pleasant experience, is it? So let's show it again. So down comes a strike, meet it, around, up through, exert that pressure. You can see that he instantly wants to let go. He wants to run away from that pain. That's what I want. This technique is called the Schlüssel. It means the key. I don't actually know why it's called the Schlüssel. Lock and key, it might be a pun. Germans love their puns. But it was a decently common technique. So what if he happens to know the Schlüssel and I'm attacking him first? Well, I end up in a bit of a pickle, but not to worry. If I attack down at him and he starts to set up the Schlüssel, I'm going to just set up the Schlüssel on him. Because what happens when he gets that Schlüssel locked up is when I go to set it up myself, it turns my arm sideways. So now my nerve is facing that way. His isn't. And he just ends up doubly locked up in place, which is good for me. So now let's talk about what happens when he attacks straight down at the top of my head. Okay. So straight down to the top of my head. That's where things get a little trickier. Because if he comes straight down, I can use my movement to get to one side or the other, and the appropriate responses from there. However, you don't always have that kind of time. If he comes straight down, it's usually best for me to do what is called a cross block, where I'm going to do both of my hands together, making a sort of X pattern. I catch that, and I'm making sure to post my body away from it. I do not want to headbutt the tip of his dagger. Not fun. So I post out and away, and from here, I have a couple options, but the one we're going to go with is I'm going to grip with my right hand, and I'm going to step up and around to turn close to him and squat. I put his elbow onto my shoulder, and I would stand up. What this does is it puts his arm into an arm bar, and you're expected to do this very quickly to shatter his arm. I'll show that a little fluidly, but I'm not going to hurt David. Oh, you'll be fine. Block, right there. Now you'll see a couple different ways of doing this. Sometimes you pull them with you. As a taller person, I like to squat down and then push up, as it gives me a little more control, makes me able to keep him safe and gradually apply pressure. Now, another option if he comes straight down, maybe I don't want to break his arm. Maybe David's actually a friend and he's just getting a little drunk right now, and David, we need to talk about your drinking problem, man. But down he comes at me, I get this block, I'm like, okay, I really can't break his arm. Well, if I rotate the other way, I'll be put in front of him. So I rotate now inward, and I squat down, and I bring his shoulder up onto mine, and I can just execute a throw. I'm not going to do that to poor David right now, but needless to say, it deposits him quite nicely at my feet, and I still have control of his arm. So, if I have a dagger in my hand, things get a little bit trickier. So now, if I have a dagger in my hand, and he comes straight down, so I can still do my cross block, but now I'm going to do it with the daggers in both of my arms, so when he strikes, I can catch that. That doesn't feel particularly pleasant. It's a very safe way of defending myself. I can also, from here, do a cheeky little disarm. So once I'm here, I'm going to roll it underneath, pop it out of his hand, do whatever I want to do to poor David. So let's show that again a little more fluidly. Down comes the strike, catch, roll around, dagger pops away, do whatever I want to do. Now let's start talking about thrust coming in from below. Thrust coming in from below. So this is often referred to as the ice pick grip. This is the sword grip. So when David is going to stab me with this, he's usually going to be going from my guts, trying to go up under my rib cage, something along those lines, or if we're in armor, he's going to be going below the belt, because that's where an opening always is. Oh, David, you're so mean. But up comes this thrust. I can defend it by stepping to the side and using my arms to block. That will work, but he's just going to stab me again. I need to stop this if I'm going to deal with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another cross block, but this time I'm going to do it low. So in comes this strike. I post my body back away from him. I push down with both of my arms, and I'm buying myself time in inches. So, from here, I can grab hold of his arm quite easily, and I can take it a couple different places. I could transport it back high and break his arm. Or maybe, just maybe, David is someone who I'm working with in my fecht school, so, or even David's a drunk. We need to talk about that drinking problem. And I want to show off for some of my friends who happen to be out drinking with me. So I'm going to push down as I step in. So his arm goes here, reach from behind his legs, grab, and from here I can either make him front flip, or I can just walk him about town showing everyone what a fool he is for attacking me. When you live in a society like people did back then, you get a little bit of a macabre sense of humor. And some of these are designed to show off, to show your martial prowess, because apparently getting stabbed on a daily basis just becomes mundane after a while. So let's show that one again a little more fluidly. No problem. So if I have a dagger in my hand, if I've got it in the ice pick grip, I can still block down like I did before, so I'm doing the same block, just now down here. Still works exactly the same. However, in general, when it comes to someone fighting you in the sword grip, you also want to be in the sword grip. The first and easiest thing I can do if he attacks me is just slice, grab, stab. Very easy. I can also just slice and run away. That's another great option. I can do it to either side, just slice, grab, and I can go wherever he is open. However, if I instead choose to block with it, in the sword grip, I'll be blocking like this. So, ice pick, my hands cross, sword, my hands don't cross. He comes up from below, I'm going to block. I'm still posting out away from him because I want to keep my guts safe. Or from here, I can grab hold of his arm and then attack, or I can do a wonderful disarm, which is I'm going to open my left hand, I'm going to push the pommel underneath both of our hands, turn it over, rip it out of his hand, and I end up with this characteristic scissor look. We also saw this during the Longsword. So, let's do it again. So I'm here, block, under, rip, whack. Otherwise, though, that's pretty much a good snapshot of Dagger coming from high, high, low, straight down the middle. And there are a bunch of different Dagger techniques, and some of them do change when you take into consideration armor. However, the majority of the Dagger techniques from the Kunst des Fechtens are designed to be used in or out of armor. So, hopefully you've enjoyed that showcase, and I'm sure I'll get a lot of great questions on this one. Thank you, David, and thank you all. Hello! Now it's time to go over the armored portion of our programming. And for this, I've got two assistants who can't really have their helmets off for this part, so I'll introduce them. This one here is John. He was part of the Messer vid. Hi, John. And this one here is Randy, who was also part of our Rapier vid. All right, so the first weapon we're going to be going over is the axe. Now, this is often referred to as a poleaxe. Sometimes you'll see they have hammer heads rather than axe blades. They're still referred to as just a poleaxe. So the poleaxe is the most versatile weapon you'll find on the medieval battlefield. It has pretty much every piece you could possibly want to mess someone up with. It's got an axe blade or sometimes a hammerhead. Each of those can be turned into a hook. You have a maul or sometimes a spike. You've got a spike here on the top that's called the dog. You've got usually a spike on the bottom as well. And this whole thing can be used as a big lever to throw. Now, here you go, John. We're going to start off with nice and simple demonstration of how they can grip the axe and how they're going to use it. Now, the big thing about armor that you don't realize just looking at it is that it's made us a lot heavier. If we just throw ourselves forward, there's a lot more momentum than there normally is. So, these guys are going to be a little more reserved in their stepping than you would have seen in our unarmored portions. But, enough of me gabbing. So, you two go ahead, face each other. Alright. So, we're going to start off with a nice easy approach in, and then John is going to deliver a strike to Randy's head. So as you can see, he puts his weight into it, he steps forward firmly, and he's striking with the maul, preferably onto the head. He doesn't want to strike too shallowly because that dog, the spike on the top, won't do enough damage. Now, go ahead and reset. Randy's going to go ahead and block. He's going to use the head of his own weapon to block this incoming strike, and then we'll see what happens. Go ahead.
Now, at the moment, they're in a bind. We've seen this with the swords before. However, there's a new aspect of it that we haven't talked about. Because of the nature of their weapons, John can now hook, pull down, and then thrust into Randy. Go ahead. That's a big thing you got to consider when you bind with the axe heads, is that action can happen. Go ahead and do it again, gentlemen. Boom. And you notice that he's attacking into the openings. Even though he can strike pretty much anywhere he wants with just the axe head, if he wants to use the point, he's going to have to thrust for gaps. So let's see Randy go ahead and defend himself in a little bit of a smarter way. This time, he's not only moving his body out of the way, he's also using the tail end of his axe to deflect. This leaves John open for a great hit from Randy. Boom. There's not a whole lot that John can do about it. So let's see that again. Now, if Randy wants to, instead of hitting him with the axe head, he could also stab him with the point at the end, or he could set up a throw. Let's see that throw setup. So as you can see, he gets nice and close to John and sort of weaves his body within John, so that way he knocks him off balance. Normally, throwing someone is decently difficult. However, since they're in armor, go ahead and do it again, guys, you're a lot more top-heavy. It doesn't require a lot of movement to get someone to fall over. Good. All right. Now let's go ahead and see what happens if Randy decides to deliver an almighty peasant strike down on John's head. Go ahead. Now John, as we know, he could use the tail end of the axe to defend, but Randy's really putting all of his juice into this. John can't just, deflect this. So he has to really raise his arms. And look, he's even getting tired. So, what's most likely going to happen is Randy's going to attack, John's going to block, Randy's going to rip it down, and then thrust at John. Go ahead. Boom. Well, that's not great. So what's going to happen now is that John is going to use Randy's momentum against him. So Randy's going to come down with a blow, John's going to move with it and strike him. You got to wait for him to pull. Do it again. Back up a little bit, you're too close. There you go. Go. Boom. Steps into it. Give me one more time. Boom. Excellent. So, those are just some bare-bone basic use of the axe. It gets way, way more complicated than that, but we're going to keep it simple because we want these guys to survive in the Alabama heat. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to spear. Now, spear and armor is particularly unique because obviously they're going to be standing further apart from each other thanks to their longer weapons, but the gaps they're going for are pretty small. Now, something I want to point out about both these guys' armor is that they're both using aventails. That's this bit of mail right here that comes off of the helmet. When it goes over the shoulder, it actually doubles up and makes it a little more protective. So even though none of us are currently wearing any pauldrons or spalders, which goes right here, this is still pretty safe. Another thing to consider is that this is plate, neck. So they're a lot safer than they look. But let's go ahead and show some basic spear action. So, the very first thing we're going to see is that they're both controlling the center line. Now, to get someone to attack you, you do have to move your point offline, which Randy will do. John takes that opening. There we go. Right into the gap. Let's see that again. Excellent. You notice that John is moving forward with small steps, but he is still hitting with quite a lot of force. Now let's see Randy parry. As you can see, he beats it aside, making a big opening, which he can then make use of. Go ahead. Oh. You also notice that Randy is couching. Why don't we hold on that couch, gentlemen? By couching it, he brings it up toward his body and locks it in place. That's exactly what we want. So that way, no matter what John does, moving that point out, he really has to kind of move backward away from it to get it out of his face. It's all a game of distance, really, with the arm. All right. Now let's see if Randy's going to take a low opening on John. So they both control the center line. John gives an opening, but Randy instead chivalrously stabs him down below the belt, as you do. Well, to parry this, John is going to have to drop his own spear point, so let's see what that looks like. He brings it across. There we go. When someone hits you below the belt, just hit them right back. Don't actually hit people below the belt. Now let's go ahead and see the other end of the spear be put into play. John is going to thrust at Randy. Randy's going to beat it aside, And John is going to use the other end of his spear to defend himself and then set up a throw. It's all just one big lever. I should point out that these guys are only doing this at about quarter speed. Real speed, we'd probably have a fall on our hands. There's a lot more that goes into fighting with the spear, obviously. It is sometimes referred to as the queen of weapons for a reason. However, like I said, Alabama heat. So let's move on to the sword, shall we? So now let's talk about the sword. Now, using the sword in armor is a little bit different than we used it out of armor. Obviously, no matter how strong I am, I cannot cut through their armor. That means that we're going to mostly focus on using the point. So let's go ahead and see. The first thing is we're going to start in a normal sword grip. We're going to attack, and then we're going to move in something called the half sword. So as Randy comes in with this attack, he's going to, as John sets aside, roll it over in his hand so he's shortened the weapon. This gives it a lot more control and also makes it easier to use in armor. It's all an up-close and personal game at this point. Let's go ahead and see that again. Good. Next, we'll see when John comes out with the half sword as well. So now things have changed. One of the most immediate targets that John can actually go for is the palm of the hand. There's not a lot of protection under there. It's just a glove. And if John is particularly good with his aim, and Randy leaves his arm dangling out there, he can just take it kind of whenever he wants. Boom. However, if Randy's a little smarter, he's going to be parrying and riposting, much like with the spear. Not a whole lot changes. He also couches. However, sometimes you need to get through the armor a little bit faster. And for this, Randy is going to show one of the often talked about techniques, which is the Mordschlag, or murder strike. So he's going to change the grip of his sword, and now use it a bit like an axe. Now, let's say that John tries to defend himself by raising his arms like before. We'll see something similar to an axe play. He can just hook, pull down, strike. Boom. Now, that pommel hitting John in the face may not look like much, but even in a helmet, getting just bopped square in the face hurts. So that was a bit of our armor showcase. Now, there's a lot more that goes into it, but we wanted to just cover the bare sort of basics, and I really hope you guys have enjoyed this.
Alright, so now it's time to talk about the rapier. And for this, we got to go over the tools and the people that will be using them. So first and foremost, what is a rapier? A rapier is going to be a long, double-edged, predominantly used for thrusting, however they can still cut quite well, sword from the Renaissance. You will see some that are longer, you will see some that are shorter, you will see some with more complex hilts, you will see some with simpler hilts like mine. But the important things about the rapier is its pieces. It's got a long blade, out here is the weak, here is the strong. So the weak has the most speed, but the least leverage. The strong has the most leverage, but is slowest. So usually you're going to use the strong to parry, and the weak to attack. Now you'll notice that ours have these guys on the end. They're thrusting tips, they make it nice and safe to stab each other, mostly, if we're wearing gear. Now, the other thing that the rapier has is, in this complex hilt, we have what is called a ricasso, which is those rings right here. I can wrap either one finger, two finger, sometimes certain grips will even show almost 3 fingers using my thumb wrapped around it. There are many different grips that you can take. It's really kind of whatever is most comfortable, but it gives me that excellent point control, so that way I can very easily move the sword with just my wrist. Now, one of the common pairings that we will have is the dagger. Now, the daggers can look like a bunch of different things. It's really kind of whatever your side weapon was. Sometimes you will see parrying daggers that are specifically made for it. Some even have complex handguards here to protect the fist. Some look a little more simple like mine. You'll see them of various lengths. It kind of depends upon the user's personal preference. If you're helping me out today, I'm going to be Randy, who we saw in the armor portion, and then Jared, who we talked to before. And these two have been doing Rapier with me for quite a while now. And something nice that you'll see with both of them is that they're using slightly different hilts than I showed you. They have their own personal preferences, both with their parrying daggers and their rapier hilts. So keep a close eye on that. So let's get to the technique, shall we? So, what's going to happen here is that Jarrett is going to find Randy's sword and then execute a lunge with what is called a glide, where his sword stays in contact with Randy's and he hits. Let's see that again. Jarrett makes sure that after he hits, he recovers while still defending himself, so Randy cannot counterattack. Now what's going to happen is that Jarrett finds Randy's sword, and Randy is going to cavazione underneath and lunge, attacking the new opening. To deal with this, what Jarrett's going to do is, in the tempo of that cavazione coming in, he's going to counter thrust on the other side. Let's see that a couple of times. Good. That's acceptable. So now what's going to happen is that Jarrett is going to execute a lunge at Randy, who's going to go to parry. Rather than stopping and going around, he's going to keep the momentum of his lunge and just attack Randy on the lower target with a mezza cavazione. Good. Again. Good. So now what's going to happen is that Jarrett is going to execute a feint, a jagged motion toward Randy's inside line to get him to move his sword, but this time he's going to cavazione fully under Randy's sword and pass forward with his back foot, gaining a large distance between him and his opponent. Good. Give me that a couple more times. It's okay if it's a little slow. Good. Okay, those are good. Alright, one more. So now what's going to happen is Jarrett is going to cavazione underneath, then he's going to pass forward with his back foot to grab hold of Randy's hilt and strike him. Now it's hand parry and girate. Big opening for Randy to take. Now as Randy lunges, Jarrett's going to move his hand across to parry and then execute his own lunge from prima. There's not much Randy can do about it. Let's see it a couple times. So now what's going to happen is Jarrett is going to open himself up wide, inviting attack once again. This time, however, rather than using his sword or his hand to parry, he's going to use his movement to parry by executing what's called a girata. Let's do it a couple more times. As the thrust comes in, Jarrett just steps to the side, allowing Randy's thrust to pass it where he was and keeping himself safe. Good. Good. So now we have Rapier and Dagger. Now the nice thing about having a dagger is that it allows you to defend with one hand while you attack with the other. However, they are best used in conjunction, as we will see. So what's going to happen is, Randy has given Jarrett an invitation above his dagger. As Jarrett lunges, Randy's going to counter lunge and use his dagger and sword in conjunction. Let's see that a couple times. Good. Randy has given Jarrett an invitation giving a below the dagger opportunity. So Jarrett's going to be attacking toward Randy's ribs. You'll notice as they do it a couple more times, Randy doesn't have to lunge this time. Jarrett's kind of coming in super deep to his personal space, which allows Randy to just extend his arm and hit in the same tempo. Alright. On guard. Now Randy's going to shift over to give an invitation above the sword. So, what's going to happen now is that Jarrett's going to lunge for Randy's upper right opening, and he's going to use his dagger once again to defend. This time he will have to execute a small lunge. Go assume prima. This guy should look pretty familiar. Basically the same thing happens. Jarrett attacks into low, and Randy's going to bring his left hand across to defend and stab Jarrett in the face. Good. So now what's going to happen is that Jarrett is going to execute a cut downward onto Randy's head. Randy's going to use his sword and dagger together to form what is called a tutta caperta parry. It means crossing, basically, an X parry. He's then going to step forward, controlling Jarrett's sword, and stab him. Good. Let's see that a couple times. There it is. Give me one more. Excellent. Cool. That would be Rapier and Dagger.
Now, the other common pairing was going to be your cloak, which you would be wearing pretty commonly. It's the older version of a jacket. Everyone would have a cloak. And what's nice about the cloak is that, again, you'd be wearing it in your daily life, but it can also double as something to defend yourself with. So, what I do is I take it here into my fist on my left hand, and I just roll it over a couple times, which gives me this nice padded mitt. Now, it is still quite strong in regards to protection. If someone cuts directly onto my arm, it could break my arm, so you won't see me using it like a shield. However, with it draping down, it does take a lot of the force out of blows. So while I don't want to catch a cut directly here, I can catch a cut down here, as I will show you in a moment. The good thing about the cloak is it pretty much covers off one side of my body, making it so that if someone wants to hit me, they've got to go around this. So let's show the cut, shall we? I hold my arm extended, and even if you're cuts it quite hard, it takes a lot of the force out of it. Now, his tip is ending up lined up with me, but if I were to hold it out here and he tries to cut my tip, he's not going to hit me. If he tries to hit me directly, that's going to hurt. Would I risk it in life or death? Yes, probably. But it's not preferred, and so the techniques reflect that you don't want to have it hit land directly. However, we do have accounts of people cheating in duels where they will wear a steel gauntlet underneath, so that way they can block with this without it being revealed to anyone else that they have that steel gauntlet.
So now we have the cloaks. The very first thing that's going to happen is Jared keeps his cloak low so that Randy attacks above it. He's going to raise his cloak to defend himself and counter thrust in between the cloak and Randy's sword. Let's see it a couple times. Porta. One more. Excellent. Right. Jared has raised his cloak, giving Randy the chance to attack below it. All Jared's going to do is bring his cloak down and across as he attacks back. Let's see it a couple more times. One more. Excellent. Good. So now what's going to happen is Randy's going to change up his tactics. Instead of attacking with cuts, Jared's going to step out, covering himself, and cut. Okay, on guard. So now what's happened is over the course of their bout, Jared has either purposely, or it's just happened, loosened his cloak. So now what he can do is he can cast it forward, and he's going to cast it not onto Randy's face, but instead onto Randy's sword, to weigh down the tip of his sword and give himself a clean opening. Let's see it a couple times.
Alright, now it's time for talking about the broadsword, or backsword. So, this is the basket-hilted weapon of most of Europe, but really it's kind of made famous by the Scottish Highlanders. So, what is a backsword versus a broadsword? So, a broadsword is going to have two edges, it is broad, and then a backsword like the one I'm using here has only one edge, and it has a little short edge, much like Messer does, and then a thick spine, because this part wasn't being used all that much, so they just went ahead and did away with that back edge. So the things that characterize this sword as Scottish are the hilt design and also the way they used it. So not just the Scots would use this, people throughout the British Isles would, and later when the Scottish regiments got really absorbed into the British Army, you will see, non-Scottish people serving in Highland regiments using these. So the key points to determining whether a hilt is Scottish is it's got this sort of design to it. I don't really know what's best to describe this, but it's got these intricate patterns. Usually you'll have a nice either felt or wool covering underneath, and then you've got these guys. Now, the ones on my sword are quite pronounced. You will also see ones that are much smaller. A lot of people will mistakenly say that these are sword catchers and that they're supposed to trap an enemy's blade and you can snap it. No one is that strong, that's not what they do.
What they actually are is they're just a reinforcement right here, since that's right over my hand. I want to make sure that that's extra strong. So, in general though, when I put my hand into this sword, it locks in quite comfortably. I'm not hammer fisting this, but it locks in so that way my hand is very protected and I can stand in these more extended type guards more safely. So, now we'll show you 2 different styles of how this was used. And an important thing about when it comes to broadsword or Highland swordsmanship is pre-culloden or post-culloden. So, little history lesson / flashback for those Highlander fans out there. A pre-culloden is going to be before the last Jacobite rebellion failed. So this would have been the older style of fighting things, and it's even called the old style of broadsword. Post-culloden meant that the Scots were reabsorbed into the British Army, and the only people that were allowed to carry swords in the Highlands were officers or soldiers of the army. So regimental style then took over, where some old tricks are kept, but it becomes a lot more simplistic and easy to just pass on to other people. Doesn't mean it's not viable, just means that it's now army strong. So, let's look at how it was used. So now let's look at some of the techniques. We're going to start with old style, and to help me out with that, I have Eric and I have Jeff. So, let's see what they can do, shall we? And we're going to start off with the first play. Let's see that again. Now let's move on to the second play, which is an evolution out of the first. So both fencers come forward now, standing in the inside guard. Again. Yeah, there we go. Go take guard. Now we're going to see a timing attack. What's going to happen is, when Eric rears up, Jeff is going to fill the opportunity that Eric has presented to him and hit him in one tempo. Yes! Okay, so now we're going to see a disarm. This is specifically referenced as the Turkish disarm, because it's all cool and foreign, and it sounds interesting when you write it for your readers. So what's going to happen is, Jeff is going to deliver a one cut toward Eric's head, and Eric is going to close the distance and take away Jeff's sword. Excellent. Let's see that again. So as they move, what's happening is that as the cut is coming in, stepping forward and taking hold of Jeff's arm, pulling it down to the ground, which exposes the back of Jeff's head. Now, if he wants to, he can also grab onto the blade and pluck it out of Jeff's hand. Okay, good. Excellent. That's the Turkish disarm. So now we're going to move forward in time into the regimental style. And for this, we've had Jeff go ahead and take a break, and now we've got Eric, and we have Andy. Now, really important thing about this style is that there are two very specific roles. In this case, we're going to have Andy here is going to be the antagonist, and then Eric is going to be the defender. Now, the weird part about this is that it's always going to be Eric that attacks first. This is because of the social conventions of the time. The antagonist is supposed to be the person who's teaching you, your senior officer, your social better, which means that for it to be okay for Eric here to attack him, he has to first be insulted. And so I'm sure you can come up with some clever things that Andy here might have said to poor Eric that would allow him to strike him. But that's where the names come from. Even though it doesn't make a lot of sense to our modern eyes as we read them, that's the way things were back in the day. So let's go ahead and see some techniques. They start off in slope sword, as this is a military system, before coming on guard. Now they will use the first of Angelo's plays, which is a series of lessons designed to teach a new recruit how to fight with the sword. Begin. So, what did Eric learn as they go through it again? What Eric learned here as they go is to attack the head, defend the head, attack the leg, and be ready for them to slip and attack back at your head. Now, let's move on to lesson 2. In lesson 2, we shall see one piece being added. So what did Eric learn? As they go through it again. Once again, he attacks and defends the head, but this time he stays down.
not recovering to the full slip as he did before, which allows him to launch a second, quicker attack at Andy's leg. So, let's move on to lesson 3. Okay. As they go through it again, what's happening here is he still attacks the head, defends the head, and uses his feint, but now he's changing targets and attacking into Andy's flank. So, that is just one of 10 lessons, and you would see it continues to build upon itself, teaching you new things. But something I want to draw special attention to before we part is the slip. This motion that they're doing as they back up. So go ahead and cut for his leg again. Every time that Andy parries, he withdraws his leg back, even if Eric attacks his head. This is to ensure that Eric can't be too clever and switch as he attacks the head. Let's go ahead and see that feint. Cut his leg, feint. No matter what happens, Andy is always protected.